Welcome everyone to our SEL Beyond the Bell webinar on integrating SEL practices in out-of-school time settings. Happy to see all of you on today, whether it is afternoon for you or still morning like it is here for me. This is Jamie Singer at the American Institutes for Research, and with me today is Jessy Newman, my esteemed colleague, and you'll be hearing mostly from Jessy today. I will be providing just a quick introduction and then turning it over to Jessy. So before I do turn it over to Jessy, I just wanted to give a little bit of information about our webinar series that we're doing. So you can see on the next slide that we have some information up here about our Beyond the Bell suite of professional development services and products. And this webinar series is part of that. We're offering webinars every other month throughout the year, and this is the third in our series, so we're really excited to have you on with us. Each one of the webinars features one of the 96 tools that is included in the Beyond the Bell Toolkit, and we will have that available for free download from our website at www.beyondthebell.org. And you do not have to scramble to write that down. I will put the information in the chat, and I will also send it out afterward to everyone who's registered for the webinar. So feel free to not scramble to write that down. But the tool that is featured today will be available for free download up until the day before our next webinar, which will be in January. So you'll have some time to download that. And we are recording this webinar, and we recorded the first two webinars as well. We'll be recording all of them in the series, and those are posted on the Beyond the Bell YouTube channel, and I will put that information in the chat box as well. So if you did miss the first two that were on youth development and staff development, those are archived and available for download. We'll also send out a survey after this webinar. We would love to hear from you. We would love to hear what worked well, what we maybe could have improved, because we do have several more that we'll be offering throughout 2019. So more to come. So we are always looking to improve and would love to hear your feedback. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn it over to Jessy, and I will be keeping a focus on the chat box if questions do come up, and I will be posting those links in there as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Jamie. Happy Wednesday to everyone who has joined us. Like Jamie said, my name is Jessy Newman, and I'm a senior researcher here at AIR. I focus almost exclusively on youth development, social and emotional learning, or SEL, and supportive learning environments. And I'm really driven by my work in translating research and evaluation into practice, and then using that practice to drive research and evaluation. And I think Beyond the Bell is a really great example of that. So I'm super excited to talk SEL and out of school time, or what you might hear me call OST during the day, things like before school, after school, during the summer, all the parts in between. And so today we'll talk about tools, and you'll walk away from this session in 20, 25 minutes or so with some strategies for doing this work immediately. Jamie is watching the chat, so please do let us know if you have any questions. If we've got some time at the end, we'll take a question or two. We can also follow up with folks after. But we'd also love to hear if you want to know something more or something different but related to SEL. Like Jamie said, we're always informing our work. We're always trying to meet the needs of the field, and we take our data collection very, very seriously. So let's dive in. My guess is that you're into, or at least curious about, this whole SEL thing. Maybe you're wondering what it is, or maybe you want to find a way to support SEL in your out-of-school time program, or maybe you've been doing this for a while and you just want to be more intentional about your SEL practice. Or maybe you're like a lot of the educators that I've met in the field who are just like, stop, I don't have an SEL program. Or maybe some people come to me and they're like, we're just a reading and math program. We don't have the time for SEL. But I hear from a lot of people that they feel like they can't do it, but they know it's important, and they want to try to figure this out. And so that's cool. Wherever you are, whatever you've got going on, I personally am really glad that you're here with us today. I think a common misconception around SEL is that you have to give up time and space for it, or that you need to have a curriculum or an established framework to be able to do this work. And those can help, But I'm here today to share with you what we know from research about evidence-based and evidence-informed ways of supporting a young person's social and emotional development that's grounded in a positive youth development approach that likely already aligns with what you're doing as a youth worker. So whether you're new to or experienced with SEL, whether you have an established SEL program or not, whether you've adopted a framework or not. That said, I do want to share a definition for SEL to ground our discussion. So I'll give everyone a minute to read what's in front of you on the screen. So this is how the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, otherwise known as CASEL, defines SEL. And before we start, I also want to acknowledge that there are many different terms. Maybe you've heard soft skills, 21st century skills. There are also a lot of different frameworks, and there are a lot of different organizations out there that are doing this really important work. I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that really, when you boil down all of the frameworks and all of the different models, and trust me, we're researchers, this is what we do, they're essentially getting at the same elements of a young person's personal and social development. But this is the most widely used and often adopted definition for the concept of SEL specifically, so I'm going to use that to frame our discussion. Now, when I think about SEL, I think about a definition in three parts. I think about the process of engaging in the practices that support the development of competencies, both in adults and with young people. Now, I shared the CASEL definition with you to frame the webinar. They've also identified 5 core competency areas. Those are self-awareness, things like understanding your own emotions, your values, strengths, your areas of growth, confidence, self-management, so regulating emotions and behaviors, setting goals, maybe you're having persistence. There's social awareness, so recognizing emotions in other people, empathy, taking another's perspective, understanding and appreciating differences. Relationship skills, which involves communication, active listening, getting along with others, negotiating, collaboration. And then finally, there's responsible decision making. So understanding cause and effect, taking responsibility, making choices. It's really about taking in everything that you know about yourself and others, and then using that information to engage in life in a responsible, productive, and personal values-based kind of way. So while those competencies are where people usually like to focus the discussion, and that's because many of us see the development of the competencies as this ultimate goal or outcome of interest, I like to frame it in this way because it's actually the first 2 parts, the process and the practices, that I think are the most critical. There are practices that support the development of these critical social and emotional competencies, but there are also practices that foster the process of social and emotional learning itself. I think it's really important that we understand that growth, development, learning, this thing we call skill building, it's a thing that happens over time, and that we as adults have to be really intentional. We have to engage in these practices or employ these strategies that help people to develop competencies. It's adults supporting young people, honestly vice versa, and doing it together. So, maybe in a lot of cases in after school, instead of this icon, and maybe, it looks something more like this, right? But it takes care, it takes attention, it takes intentionality. You're probably going to hear me say the intentionality word at least 1,000 times in the next 20 minutes. But this sort of thing, it doesn't happen by accident. And if we jump right to the competency part of this definition, then it's really easy to forget or to lose sight of the role that we can play in helping young people to develop. So we have this definition, we know about these competencies. We also have a general sense of agreement around what we know from a few decades now of really good research on what facilitates effective social and emotional learning. And we have a pretty good sense now of what matters most, and what we need to do, or what needs to be in place to facilitate that process. So first, we know that effective SEL works well when it's universal, when we take a proactive approach to supporting SEL for all young people, and when that approach is contextually relevant, culturally competent, and equitable. When I say that, I mean there's really no one-size-fits-all approach to SEL for young people. And if we take it seriously that SEL works and can be employed with all young people, then that means it can and should look different, because young people come to us from a variety of settings. They have a different experience. They come from different backgrounds. We also know that SEL works best when it's systemic, when it's integrated into the many different settings where young people, and quite frankly adults, grow and develop, from the classroom to the school building, out-of-school time settings and experiences, with families and throughout the community. There was a point, I think, where most people only thought of SEL as this classroom-based experience, and there was very much a mindset of like, okay, it's Tuesday, it's 2:30, it's time to do SEL before we have math at 3. And while I don't want to completely invalidate that curricular approach to SEL, that is a very effective way to do this, but we also know that there are other ways to do this, and that ensuring that SEL is woven into the fabric of all of our experiences is a really powerful approach that makes this work really well. When it's systemic, when it's integrated, it also allows for the reinforcement of those competencies and skills that young people are learning. So in my opinion, one of the most important things that we've really been able to hone in on recent years is that SEL works best when young people and adults feel safe and supported, more now so than ever before. So safety refers to both physical safety, which is foundational, as well as emotional safety, where people feel like they belong and can engage in positive relationships. The climate really matters. It has to be conducive to supporting competence development, for competence development to happen. The climate and culture of your program is also really important to SEL because development doesn't happen in isolation. So like, think about a young person's program experience, right? If they come in, maybe they walk in alone, no one's there to greet them, they go to a table, they eat snack, maybe they're told to be quiet while they're sitting there eating. Then they have to get up, they're told to be quiet again, they have to walk in a straight line in the hall to go to an activity. Maybe the staff are, they're just kind of neutral, or maybe they even seem like a little annoyed or rushed because it's the start of program and activity. And you have these young people walk in a room and the staff person's like, okay, we're going to sit in a circle and I want everyone to talk about their day or something that happened to them and talk about how you feel. Well, think about it, right? What are all the things that led up to that moment that would make a young person want to open up and share? Is the climate really conducive to social and emotional learning at that point? And you can think about it in a different way, right? A young person walks in, maybe they get a fist bump at the door. There's a staff person standing there waiting to greet them, tells them they're excited to see them, asks them how their day was. Maybe that staff person or a different staff person remembers something interesting that they talked about a few days ago and brings that back up. They sit down, they have the opportunity to eat snack while they chat with their friends. They're given the responsibility to line up and walk responsibly to their next activity. That young person's going to be in a way better space to then share in a group or participate in those activities going forward, right? And this is all about climate and culture and creating a safe and supportive space, but it also gets back to what I was saying earlier about this being systemic and integrated. Some of the best programs that I've visited in my 5 or 6 years of doing this work here at AIR have been programs where they talk about how this is just what we do, right? Or they say this is just the way that we are. That warmth and love and caring is really built into their everyday practice. And that is what works best for SEL. That's what really sets the stage for young people to develop those important competencies that we care so much about. And finally, speaking of the competencies, we know that effective social and emotional learning enables young people and adults to develop these competencies. But we also know that the approach to competence development has to be, yes, I'm going to say it again, intentional. Recent studies have articulated what we call this safe approach to skill development, meaning that the teaching, the skill building really has to be sequenced, with each skill building from the skill before it. It has to be active, where there's focused time and attention on competence development, and where you're explicitly targeting a specific attitude, mindset, behavior, or skill. And that active piece is really critical because young people need to have opportunities to practice, to get feedback, and to reflect on their learning, with the safety to take productive risks and the understanding and comfort of knowing that it is okay to make mistakes, because that is how we learn and grow. So, like I mentioned earlier, and like Jamie said at the start, my thinking around SEL is grounded in the youth development approach. A lot of this is included in the Beyond the Bell Toolkit. You can check out chapters 2 and 4 in the toolkit for more information on youth development more broadly and about integrating those practices into activities. It is my view that really good social and emotional learning is grounded in really good youth development. So I encourage everyone to start there. Like Jamie said, our good friend and colleague Fausto Lopez hosted our first Beyond the Bell webinar of the series, which was focused on youth development. A recording of that webinar is hosted on our YouTube channel. You should definitely go watch it if you weren't able to attend the first one, or even if you just really love Fausto. He's super fun to watch. You should go check it out again. Maybe show it in a staff meeting or a staff professional learning opportunity. It really is foundational. And speaking of things that are foundational and thinking about staff professional learning, something else that is absolutely foundational, supporting adults. I'm going to harp on this just for a second, but there are adults who do this work every day with young people. I just mentioned professional learning, and Jamie mentioned this earlier. Our colleague Janet Levings also talked about this on our last webinar. See, like, we practice what we preach here at AIR with this whole intentionality thing, even in the way that we've scaffolded our webinar series. But really, it's also a webinar that's worth checking out. Fausto on youth development, Janet Levings on staff development. And then to tie it all together, in this webinar, we're featuring Beyond the Bell Tool 62. That will be our featured tool of this month. So just for those of you who may not have a copy of the toolkit, as Jamie mentioned, Beyond the Bell does have 96 tools. They all relate to content in the book. So we're making this one tool available. I'll talk a little bit about it now, but I encourage everyone, go on our website, download that after this, and make use of it. So Tool 62 is a really great tool if you want to conduct a professional development session on youth development. Now, I will say we wrote the book before we ever even conceived of a webinar series that we're doing right now. So I would actually suggest that first you check out the webinars I just mentioned and then go ahead and use this tool. The tool includes a suggested training format. It breaks down how you could facilitate a training session. And I will say, you can see it on the screen, it might be a little bit small. We've broken it down into how you could facilitate it, but there is some flexibility, right? The training session, it could take an hour, it could take longer, it could take less, depending on how strictly you want to adhere to our schedule, or you could even break it up into smaller segments as part of your staff meeting. Within the plan, there is an interactive activity that staff could work together on, where they would either design an activity or rethink existing activities to ensure that they intentionally integrate youth development practices. So using the tool and using the text from the Beyond the Bell narrative in the beginning, staff would think through how they can structure activities to create a warm and welcoming environment, to build supportive relationships and opportunities to belong, how they could engage in positive behavior management. They'll focus on offering young people choice, opportunities for decision-making, leadership, how they build in time for reflection, and how they support skill building. All of those things should sound pretty familiar because they're basically what I just ran through on those slides about effective SEL. Like I've been saying, a lot of what supports really good SEL is foundational to good youth development. So if you want to focus on SEL, start there. Start with the adults, think about training. I will also say that Fausto shared the youth development checklist from Beyond the Bell. That's Tool 63. That's also a great activity as part of a staff professional development session. You could use it in coordination with Tool 62. You could do a follow-up session, but I highly recommend that one as well. So once you're grounded in the youth development approach, I would encourage everyone to check out our brief on supporting social and emotional development. This brief is freely available on our website. We'll include it in the link with all the materials after today's webinar. We wrote this brief to demystify some of the different frameworks, which I alluded to earlier, and it really gives a nice primer on SEL. So if you're thinking about sort of an SEL 101 for your staff, this might be something that's useful for you to use. And the brief also has a self-reflection tool that goes with it, which is easily one of the most popular tools we've ever created. That's an actual fact. We look at our download rates off the website, and it is one of the most accessed things we've ever done. And it's also free. So we'll be sure to share that with everyone after the webinar. The staff self-reflection tool is really useful in thinking through the adult practices and competencies that foster SEL, a lot of which we've talked about today. And I'll run through those pretty quickly. The tool breaks down SEL practices into two categories. There are social practices and program implementation practices. So social practices focus on the interactions between the adults and young people during program activities. So you have things like problem solving, right? That involves things like maybe co-developing guidelines, working with young people to suggest logical consequences, things that support the development of competencies related to, relationship building and decision making. There's staff language, which is so critical, and sometimes I think we forget, as the adults, you're always a role model, right, for both the good and the bad, whether you want to be or not. Young people are always watching, and they're always learning from you. Covers things like responsibility and choice, and then warmth and support, which we talked a lot about earlier. Program implementation practices, on the other hand, focus on the strategies that the adults use during activities. There's an emphasis on things like content delivery, skill development activities. So we've got things like cooperative and group learning and group discussions, self-reflection and assessment, whether and how you balance program activities between concrete, very tangible things and abstract thinking, whether and how you're encouraging grit and persistence, and then lastly, how you're focused on competence building. And one of the things that I love most about the first two sections of the tool is that it's really useful for self-reflection. Definitely that's what it is. But the items are basically a list of strategies that you could employ at any given moment, right? So for example, there's an item about providing opportunities for youth to share what they're doing and receive feedback from one another. Well, if you rate yourself a little low on that one, that's okay, but now you know that that's a good thing that you could do to support a young person's social and emotional development. Or there's another item about discussing the goals for each activity with young people. Again, if you rate yourself low, there's another really tangible and seemingly small but also really important way that you could change your practice almost immediately to do little things that are more supportive of social and emotional growth. So the tool is both assessment and, in a way, intervention, so to speak. Now, both social and program implementation practices are really important, but there's a third part which I actually think should come first and is the most important part, and that is adult social and emotional competence. So this is the third section of the self-reflection tool, and it really focuses on you as the adult, your practices, your emotions, your behaviors and beliefs, and how those things inform the ways in which you engage with young people, how you run activities, and the climate that you create or foster during program time. As a field, I think we've spent a lot of time focused on the competencies, and we're talking a lot about practices now too, but we also really have to focus on the adults in the space and what they bring to the table. So I see this in two parts. There's a part where we're focused on whether the adults have the social and emotional competencies themselves to be able to then help young people develop those competencies, right? Like, how are you going to help someone learn how to manage their emotions if you're stressed and yelling and getting frustrated with them? But then there's a bigger part too around supporting the social and emotional health of the adults who work with youth. Let's be real. I don't think I'm going to say anything that's shocking, but this is a really rewarding but pretty stressful job. So the tool doesn't really get at that second part, but since I had a captive audience, I did want to raise it while you're all listening, because I think it's something that we have to think about. And doing things programmatically to create a safe and supportive space and climate, that's great for young people. It's also really great for adults, and that'll help with that too. So the tool is a self-reflection tool. So you'll go through a number of items where you'll rate yourself using a rating scale that we created. And then there's an action planning piece at the end that's super critical. And so when you're there, you can think about where you scored higher and lower. You can identify your strengths, areas for continued growth. And you can also think about how youth might rate your practice. Honestly, I always tell people it would be awesome to actually give the tool to young people who are old enough and ask them to rate your practice if you're comfortable. That takes like a really advanced level of youth worker to shift that balance of power to young people, but what a really cool learning opportunity for both of you. And it also focuses on what professional learning opportunities might be beneficial from your perspective. So I also want to encourage everyone to keep in mind that the act of self-reflection might be new for a lot of people, and it's a very vulnerable thing. So just like I shared earlier about creating the conditions for youth to share, you have to think about that too. If you're in a program leadership position, you have to really think about what your staff experience might be like if this is something you want to bring back to your program and use with staff. Self-reflection works best when people feel and know like it, this is a low stakes thing, when it's truly intended to drive growth and improvement, right? So make sure that you're creating the space for that. So I've shared a few resources with you. We'll make all of this available after the webinar. You might be sitting here now thinking, that was a lot in 23 minutes. What am I going to do with all of this? So here's what I would recommend. First, I would start off with some professional development for staff. You can use Tool 62, which is our featured tool, to get grounded in youth development. You could even do a second session that's more of an SEL 101, where you can have folks watch the brief SEL overview part of this webinar. You could even go back and look at Fausto and Janet's webinars if you want. All of this is available on our YouTube channel. Once you have a grounded sense of what youth development and SEL is, then you can move into some intentional self-reflection with the adults in your program. I always recommend discussing and reflecting on the reflection process with someone. You could do it as a group, or you could talk about it one-on-one with your staff or with your supervisor, depending on your role. But make a plan to A, keep doing the things that you're doing well, and B, focus in on one or two things that you could do differently to improve your practice. None of us are perfect. You're going to score high on some spots. You might score lower on others. But when you think about improvements, don't try to do it all. You can't. Not all at once anyways. So pick a few things and start there. And once you've got that, move on. You could use the tool repeatedly if you're so inclined, right? It could be really great for formative focused growth. And like I said earlier, SEL works best when it's truly integrated into everything that you do. So I encourage everyone to really make this a part of your culture, the culture of your program. Start with the adults. Build it into things like staff meetings, really make this part of your best people practice, and then let us know how it goes. We love hearing from you. Send us an email, get us on Twitter. We're always at conferences. You can find us there too, but we'd love to hear from you. So Jamie, I'll pass it back to you if you have anything to wrap us up.
I do not have anything to add, although Roberto did have a question in the chat, which we might have time to answer in the 2 minutes left. It's about examples you've seen where SEL practices in a school are complemented with SEL practices in out of school time.
That is a really awesome question. Can we make another 30-minute webinar about school program alignment? Yeah, I think it's a question. Right. No, but it's important. So I'll say a few things very quickly, and then we can think about maybe sharing some additional resources. If you have Beyond the Bell, Chapter 3 focuses on partnerships with schools, families, and the communities, and I think that there are a lot of resources in there that focus mostly on aligning goals with the school, right? And those goals can be social and emotional, they can be academic, it can be all of the above, so that after school is a complement to what happens in the school day. I know the Partnership for Children and Youth also has some really great resources specifically around SEL alignment from the school day to after school. So I'd encourage people to check out those resources as well. Those were released like a year and a half ago. You could probably find it on the Partnership for Children and Youth website. That's all I will say for now, but we can follow up with more information.
Great. Thank you so much, and that brings us exactly to time. So thank you, Jessy, for all this wonderful information, and thank you everyone for being on with us today. You will receive a follow-up email through the Eventbrite system with a link to a survey, as well as links to all of the resources we shared today through the chat. So everyone, enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully you'll be joining us either in person at a conference coming up or on our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.